Hello, good evening, YIMBY Pro Housing Advocates. Thank you so much for joining our first statewide event of the year. And boy, is 2023 lining up to be another very eventful year. It's so exciting to be here with you all, the engine that makes this transformative change we've seen over the last few years possible. And we definitely are going to need you. Just as in previous years, to show up and show out in support of another aggressive legislative agenda. So tonight, our hardworking legislative team will give an overview and set the context of this year's session. They'll also give a rundown of the bills we are currently sponsoring, along with a couple of other important bills we'll be actively engaged in. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can without keeping you here all night. So keep those questions coming and firing in the Q&A box. We're going to pause for just a couple minutes and give folks an opportunity to join because we know folks are kind of scrambling to get on after work. But we just wanted to give a quick introduction and rundown about what we're doing tonight. So we'll get paused for just about 30 seconds to a minute and let more folks get the opportunity to join us today. But we're not going to wait too long because we have a whole lot to talk about. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Now, as you all know, it's really early in the process. The bills a lot of them just crossed the finish line. Some bills aren't quite ready to be taken out of the oven yet, while others still have some ingredients that need to be added or removed. And as they continue to be crafted and altered to move them through the legislative process, we'll be sure to keep you updated. And you can always go to our 2023 legislation page on our website for the latest updates. Aaron Eckhouse, our regional policy manager, is going to drop the link in the chat there to make sure that you all see that. Now, since we have a lot of bills to cover, and y'all sure didn't join to hear me talk, let me introduce the folks that are doing the heavy lifting in the halls of the Capitol. And here tonight, our legislative team, starting with California YIMBY's legislative advocate, Jordan Panana Carbajal, our policy associate, Ryan Joy, our director of strategic partnerships, Robin Leslie, our fearless leader, President and CEO Brian Hanlon, will be joining us a little bit later, and you can ask some questions of before we log off. And kicking us off with the 2023 legislative framing, one of our top-notch lobbyists that we've been working with for years, Vice President of W Strategies, Sosan Mandanat. Take it away, Sosan.
Great. Thanks, Constantine. Really glad to be here today with you all and with my esteemed colleagues here on the California YIMBY team. February 17th marked the bill introduction deadline for the 2023 legislative session. And in typical fashion, we saw a large number, bulk of legislative bills that were introduced on February 17th, specifically in the final days of last week. Legislature introduced around 1,750 assembly bills and over 800 Senate bills for a total of around 2,600 bills in total this year. That actually marks the largest number of bills in the last 10 years. So we really saw a marked increase from the last few years, which obviously were, marred by COVID and created a lot of barriers and challenges to introducing a large number of legislation. One thing I think that is important to note, and something that Constantine already mentioned, was of the bills introduced, there were about 490 spot bills and 551 intent bills, which means quite a number of the bills that we actually saw introduced of that 2,600 were placeholder bills, and we can anticipate these spot bills to get their substantive language in the coming weeks, which I think is really important for folks to know right now, because that means that some of the bills that we will be talking about even just today will be spot bills or intent bills that we will add substantive language to as the policy continues to be developed. So I think one thing that's important to note for folks is that we saw a record number of housing production and streamlining measures. Hi, Brian. Introduced this year. Housing, homelessness, and actually home ownership as well continue to be really high priority issues for the legislature as well as the governor. And a number of those bills are coming from the California YIMBY team, but also from a number of our allies. We're really excited to be working with partners on a number of measures, be it from streamlining or homeownership opportunities to really increase access to affordable housing. And I am gonna stop there and see if there are any questions. That is just a high level summary of where we're at right now, but I'm happy to answer any questions from folks before we jump into the meat of each of these issues.
Go ahead and make sure you ask your questions in the Q&A box. We want to answer as many as we possibly can, but this won't be the only chance. So if you throw them in there, we'll try to get to them as we go as well. And so depending on how this goes, we'll also should have some time at the end to answer as well. Oh, here's a great question from Colleen Herman. What's the difference between spot bills and intent bills?
Great question. Spot bills generally at this point will make language changes that could be non-substantive. Essentially, it might be something as simple as changing an and or an or another word that's really minor. Intent bills actually will enumerate the intent of the language itself, and will say something to the effect of, it is the intent of the legislature to pass legislation on such and such issue, right? Whereas the spot bill might actually have a little bit more language in there within the code section itself. Hopefully that's addressing the question. They're not, it's pretty vague, but that's really the biggest difference, is one actually labels the intention, whereas the other actually just changes a simple word.
That's great. And now here's another question that came in from the chat. Or from email a little earlier. There are a lot of groups that are writing housing. There's a lot of groups that are writing different housing bills. And the question was, how do we divvy those bills up? Like, how does that work in terms of who takes what bill on?
That's a really great question, and I will, ask anyone else on the call to jump in here as well. But I will say, during the fall, and anyone can jump in, but during the fall, we generally have conversations. Brian, do you want to take
yeah, sure. Like, I'll jump in. I mean, like the honest answer is, like, there is no like Wizard of Oz behind the curtain that like divvies up like who does like what bill. That said, we do attempt to coordinate with our partners as much as we possibly can. So for instance, and I think Paul, you says, I think you're probably getting to this with our Home Builders Alliance, the Home Building Alliance, and a large alliance of folks that have representation in Sacramento and a pro-housing. We had a 70-person retreat in Culver City in November of last year to talk about our like shared legislative priorities, give folks a heads up on like what we're working on. And like, it's like during that time that we start, saying it's like, oh, wait, well, maybe it makes more sense for you to run this for the bill, or, oh, I'd love to be a co-sponsor of that, et cetera. But again, if someone wants to run a bill, like they can. There is no strong gatekeeping involved.
That's great. All right, let's see. Adam asked, will we be trying another massive upzoning bill this year, and such as an SB 27, SB 50, SB 50 Volume 2? We're going to talk a little bit more about that, some specific legislation in just a minute. I don't want to steal all the thunder from the Ledge team. And there might be some things. There are also all kinds of things in the works. So some of the things late to see, but we'll kind of touch on some of those, exactly what we got cooking for this year, in a brief overview what may come down the road as well. So just hold tight on that, Adam, and we'll definitely cover that in just a bit. One other question that was an interesting question that came across was, there's some committees seem that might be a little more challenging this year. For example, the Assembly Local Government Committee seems to like that might be a really tough committee for housing. What is that? How are we going to, or how do we address that or deal with that? Or what does that look like in terms of how should we kind of deal with those legislators in those committees that we don't necessarily have a really strong history on being strong on housing?
I'm happy to get to that, but I'm not going to answer everything that we're doing because some of this is a little bit sensitive for a call this big. But I will suggest that most of the bills that we intend to pass this calendar year are going to be introduced in the Senate. Are the Assembly housing bills that we intend to pass this year are authored by a powerful person in the Assembly who other members are going to be loath to upset. And we have a good relationship with the chair of that committee. Now, Assembly member Aguiar Curry wouldn't call her a YIMBY necessarily, but over the past few years, we developed a relationship with her and her staff, and we have been able to get all of our bills through her committee. It requires negotiation, but we found that she's been reasonable and open to what we're trying to do. That said, the current composition of that committee is very challenging. The composition, that committee may not stay in its current form for the duration of this legislative calendar year. And I won't say more than that.
Awesome. And I think just to even add on that, it's, a lot of members do bring different perspective. And it's also important for us to help educate members on housing policy and understand their perspectives, even if we don't always agree. So, different members represent different areas, and sometimes understanding the needs of different communities help get us to amendments that get a member's vote as well. So that process is messy and not perfect, but it's the one we have. And at the end of the day, we do well with it. All right.
Constantine, can I just add one thing to that too? And
Absolutely.
in that we are, legislature has a record number of new members. And I think that there's a really unique opportunity for us, to Constantine's point, to help educate a lot of the new members that are coming in to the legislature and try to work with them to better understand the needs of folks, whether in their districts or in other districts, when it comes to housing production and housing affordability. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity for California YIMBY and our ally organizations to really try to work with those new members to help them understand some of the policy issues that we have been working on for many years and will continue to work on.
Fantastic. All right, let's see if we have anything. I think we can do one more before we move on. I want to get into the bills and make sure we have time to go through them. Here's an interesting question. Robert Fruckman asked, how can the conflict between building trades and housing advocates be resolved or at least calmed? I know that's one that's on a lot of folks' minds.
We win. I mean, look, it is unfortunate that the trades have adopted their current negotiating position. This is not I don't believe that this is a position that is that I've talked to other individual trade union leaders who don't really understand why they're adopting this position. But look, it is the case that the carpenter's language would provide real middle-class wages and job protections for workers, and provides a real pathway towards scaling union membership and growing union membership in California. while we remain more than willing to work with the trades in areas where we agree. In fact, we co-sponsored a bill with them last year. And so, and we're happy to continue to do that. But I think their current position and the way that they have been couching their opposition to these bills hasn't left a lot of room for negotiation with them. I don't know, Citizen, if you want to add anything to that.
I mean, I don't think that there's a silver bullet answer to finding a way to resolve that other than to continue to try to work, and find some common ground in the places where we can, to Brian's point. I do think, though, it continues to be a challenge to sort of hit the same wall repeatedly over time. And so, frankly, I'm not sure there is a way to resolve it or calm it easily, but I think that we will continue to try to work together to find opportunities for partnership, and where we can't, to really try to explain to legislators and to other organizations why we can't, and really fight for the pieces in each bill, or the policies that we are really going to strongly advocate for and that we believe need to be in each of the bills that we are sponsoring or supporting.
Thank you both for that very thoughtful answer. Let's dive into the bills. Jordan, do you want to start talking about AB 1633?
Sure, thank you. And again, thank you everyone for making time. I know it's Wednesday around 6 o'clock, everybody's getting home, but I really want to thank you for being part of the conversation and getting like a first review of what's going on in the legislature. So yeah, the first bill I want to talk about, AB 1633 by Senator Ting in San Francisco. This is actually a rerun of AB 2656 from last year over what happened in the Stevenson Project court case. And what this bill does, it amends the Housing Accountability Act, HAA, to clarify that cities that deny or delay any housing projects that receive a secret clearance are in violation of the HAA. Last year, California YIMBY was a high support of this bill, but now we're joining the coalition as one of the co-sponsors alongside Bay Area Council and Spur. And just for context, last year, this version, we're using the same language of the bill that got held up in Senate Appropriations. So now we're bringing this bill up again. And as Brian mentioned, with strong champions in the Assembly side, we're working with the budget chair of Assembly, Senator Ting, on this bill. So we're really excited to be part of this coalition, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the bill.
I just wanted to jump in real quick, Jordan. Thanks for that review. There was a question sent earlier about what's going to be different this year. How are we going to get it done this year, where it died last year in the Senate Appropriations Committee? So I had a meeting with Graciela, who couldn't be here today, one of our excellent contract lobbyists, Senator Portantino, and his lead staff from the Appropriations Committee. It was great. Senator Portantino and I chatted about bikes and bike riding for a while. He's been totally bike pilled during the pandemic. It's amazing. I just explained to him, it's like, hey, look, we supported this bill last year. We thought it was important, but we're coming on board this year because we really think it's very important, and we want to provide it that extra political heft in order to get it done. But I want to commit to you to understanding what your concerns are, and if there's anything that we can do in order to get the approval and address the concerns that your committee may have. It was a very good, positive conversation. To be clear, the bill died because of trades opposition. And so it is really unfortunate. I don't personally like having to, be in the middle of this trades carpenters fight, but that is the position that we find ourselves in, and I don't really know that there's any way out of it if we are going to try to pass legislation in order to end the state's housing crisis. We've already started working to address the concerns of the person who killed it. But to be clear, a lot of this is going to be political work and building support for this bill and for other bills that the trades are opposing.
Any any questions on AB 1633 before we move on? Give it a second. Anyone has any questions around AB 1633? If you think of something later, that's okay. We'll come back and answer some questions at the end as well. We'll try to get to some more at the end. But if you have any questions on 1633, now's the time. All right. Well, I guess that was just such a great overview that folks don't have any questions on. I love it. All right. Let's next up, we're going to talk about SB 43, Sosin and Ryan.
Yes, so quite a few of you may have seen notification in the news and something in the news about this, or any of our releases that came out recently. But SB 423 is authored by Senator Wiener, and it's seeking to make permanent and expand upon the provisions of SB 35. Ryan's going to go into some of the details, but as many of you know, SB 35 has been a landmark housing bill authored by Senator Wiener in 2017. And there have been a few studies, notably a 2021 study by the San Francisco Planning Department that actually found that the passage of SB 35 helped create and streamline the development of somewhere around 3,000 new homes. And that's just within the city boundaries of San Francisco. So thinking about that from a more macro statewide level, it really has done quite a lot to expand housing production and reduce many of the barriers. So Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the specifics of the bill?
Sure. Thanks, Sosin. And the reason why this bill was introduced is SB 35 sunsets on January 1st of 2025, meaning once the clock hits January 1st, developers will no longer be able to use SB 35 streamlining. So the push really is this year to delete that sunset, to make SB 35 indefinite, and expand the bill in some notable ways to make it more effective. One of the major expansions of the bill is the alteration of the labor policy. So SB 35 required skilled and trained labor, which is the building trades preferred labor policy on projects, mixed income projects generally. There's a confusing scale about how it applies and the affordability requirements on those projects, but this isn't an SB 35 101 course. But this year, the extension bill will instead utilize the AB 2011, the labor standards, which is preferred by the carpenters. So this really is going to be kind of the major building trades versus labor fight this year. Although there are likely to be a number of fronts on that fight. So that's going to be the major change. This bill will also now apply to the coastal zone. So all of those coastal, high cost jurisdictions are now going to be subject to SB 35. And it also applies to cities without a compliant housing element. So as you've seen in the news lately, there are a number of cities in the Bay Area, and I think even more in the LA region, who do not have a compliant housing element. And that makes them subject to the builder's remedy. But now, if this bill passed, it will also make them subject to SB 35. I'll pause there. There's a number of other smaller changes that are pretty technical, but I'll see if we have any questions.
Any questions, additional questions on SB 423?
I'll just add, this bill is probably going to be California YIMBY's highest priority bill in terms of passing it this year with using our lobbying and grassroots muscle in order to get it done, just because this is going to be a really, really tough fight and we need to get it done this year.
A great question came from Bobby Garrity, who says, my senator, Ochoa Bao, is on the Senate Housing Committee. Is there any risk of SB 423 not getting out of committee? If so, what are the best things I can do to help get it out? What actions are most important to take early on? I love that question. I'll let others answer, but I might have a couple of ideas there too.
Well, fortunately, the chair of the Senate Housing Committee is Senator Weiner, who is the author of this bill. So there is a very, very slim chance that this bill would not get out of committee. However, the fight will likely be harder in the assembly, as Brian has kind of alluded to. There are some more complicated politics there, especially with the local gov committee. Brian, Sosin, do you have anything else to weigh in on that?
Well, the only other thing I will say is that if you are asking what you can do, I would say, one piece of advice I would have is to call your member ahead of committee, and California YIMBY does a great job of notifying our partners ahead of major votes and working with folks to make sure that we're getting grassroots out there. But we would love for anybody who is in districts where we know our members may not be as YIMBY as we would like them to be, to let them know how important these pieces of legislation are to them when it's going up for a critical vote. And we would ask you to encourage your neighbors and friends to do the same.
Yeah, I would double down on that. Make sure you're calling your legislator. If you have the opportunity, we have our lobby weeks or lobby days, and we do the lobby either in district or in Sacramento. Jump on, be part of that group. When we send out those emails and ask you to sign a petition, send an email or log that call to your legislator. Those things move the needle. So it's important, if you want to see this housing legislation passed, don't just yourself call. Make sure you get your friends, your family, your cousin, your homie down the street, Bebe and them, all of them. Everybody jump on, get them all to call, log their vote, and make sure log their voice to be being heard on in support of these critical bills and legislation. We'll send out the tools, but we really need you to take those actions. It's incredibly important. They have to hear from you. Lisa asked, without AB 423 and SB 35, how much teeth does the housing element really have? This seems like the biggest incentive for cities to hit their numbers.
Well, I would just add, so look, it's important, but I would just add, like the Housing Accountability Act still applies, right? Like that isn't going away. And so there are still other measures to ensure that local governments approve housing that is consistent with their new housing elements and the zoning that results from those housing elements. But we really do think that this is going to be a critical bill. It's been enormously successful for deed restricted subsidized housing, in part because of the labor standards language is different. And so what we're really hoping to do now is to expand on these successes of SB 35 with subsidized affordable housing to apply to mixed income housing as well. And the fact that many more jurisdictions are going to be subject to SB 35, SB 423 provisions because of these new higher RHNA allotments makes it all the more important to pass SB 423.
And make sure you ask your questions in the Q&A box so we can get as many of those answered right here. So don't forget to just make sure you get those questions for us, and we're going to answer as many as we possibly can. Zach Bowling asked, is there any possibility SB 423 could be killed in appropriations?
I would say Senate appropriations, highly unlikely. Assembly appropriations, less unlikely. Is it, you think that's fair, Ledge team?
I mean, our hopes is that Assemblymember Rivas will assume the position of Speaker. I think it's June 15th. I actually don't know the exact date.
30th.
But 13th. Thank you. But
30th.
when he does,
30.
30th. Thank you. When he does, we're hoping that the labor politics in the Assembly will be a little bit more amenable to the AB 2011 labor standards. But AB 2011 was passed last year and it had the full support of the Speaker. So we're hoping that some of those dynamics that allowed AB 2011 to get passed will hold over this year.
Dominic Gonzalez asked another great question. Should the focus be on getting rid of the sunset period and then focus on the other major components once it has been made permanent? Or what sort of conversations were had regarding this strategy?
We don't know how much longer Senator Wiener has left in the state Senate. There are other political opportunities may arise for him. And we think it is really important, as is the senator, to remove the sunset and make the law more broadly workable for mixed income housing as well. Again, look, bills get amended as they go through the committee process. And so, but we do think it's important to start out with a sort of strong statement of values of like where we think that this bill should end up.
All right. Any addition? You have a chance for another question or two on 423. If folks go ahead and drop it in the Q&A box. Or we'll move on. And again, if you miss it, if you're trying to get it together and trying to get that question, drop it in the box and we'll try to come back around to it at the end. All right, Gloria, that's a great question. I'm going to get that one at when we kind of at the end, once we get kind of through all the bills around bills that'll be aligned with anti-displacement and tenant protection advocates. All right, moving forward, let's go. Ryan, why don't you start talking a little bit about AB 309 and AB 835?
Sure. So I'll start off with AB 309. AB 309 is a bill that we are co-sponsoring with YIMBY Action and East Bay for Everyone. And this is a follow-up to AB 2053 last year. AB 2053 was Assemblymember Lee's Social Housing Act. The Social Housing Act last year would have allowed the state, or rather created a new state entity to buy, build, and manage social housing. And the goal of social housing, for those of you who haven't really heard the term defined, is to create an economically sustainable mixed income housing project, which would allow individuals to pay variations of rents based off of their income. And the rents from the higher income earners would subsidize the rents for the lower income earners. So the goal generally of social housing is to create a revenue neutral model where it doesn't rely on as much outside funding to remain sustainable. One of the biggest issues with public housing in US history has been it's subject to budget cuts. And that's a big reason why public housing ended up failing the communities that it was meant to serve. So that was AB 2053 last year. AB 2053 died in the Senate Governance and Finance Committee. It was disappointing, but it got really far in the process, and it was really encouraging to us. So Assemblymember Lee is coming back this year, and he's trying to figure out how to retool the Social Housing Act and learn from some of the pain points that happened last year. And obviously, this is, it's a pretty far-reaching policy. So we're working with our co-sponsors and his office to figure out what's the most feasible type of most feasible policy that we can get passed this year. Right now, the bill is intent language. So we're hoping to have a more substantive bill in the coming weeks. And I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
Any questions? Go ahead and throw them in the Q&A box. From Zach Bowling, I heard this could be just a study bill this year.
There's a chance that it could just be a study bill this year. We're really trying to figure out how we can bring the existing state agencies to the table. They're understandably resistant to like getting new work. So we're trying to figure out how we can best incorporate existing programs, possibly like retooling some existing programs into some sort of social housing model. But we're still trying to work through the pain points from last year. So to be determined.
Any additional questions? Be sure to throw them in the Q&A box. Zach had a follow-up. Did HCD consult on this?
We are in talks with HCD, but they generally do not like actively consult on bills like early in the process, unless it's a bill that they themselves are introducing. So we're trying to make sure that we're keeping HCD in the loop, but they're not active partners necessarily.
All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Want to go on to the next one, 835, Ryan?
Cool. Yeah, so this is another bill that we're excited to work on with Assemblymember Lee. This bill we're not officially signing on as co-sponsors, but like the social housing bill, the seeds of this policy were really planted by the YIMBY movement. This bill, there's a few different names for it, but most people call it single stair reform. Other people call it vertical access reform. We're still kind of working on the comms on this policy. But the idea of this bill is we're trying to look at international best practices and figure out how other countries build apartment buildings so efficiently and on such kind of small lots. One of the common themes in the United States is you see these really big, massive apartment buildings that often take up like an entire block. And a major reason why our apartment buildings look the way they do is because of our building codes, and particularly our staircase requirement. Any apartment building above 3 stories in California and in much of the United States needs a second stairwell. Whereas in most other countries, the United States and Canada really are outliers in requiring this. In most other countries, apartment buildings up to like 6 to 10 stories can have a single stairwell. And that allows apartment buildings to fit on much smaller lots. But it also allows the architects and the developers to build different sized apartments. When you have a big massive building that's segmented by a hallway, you're forcing the units on either side of that hallway, and you're decreasing the actual usable size of the apartment. So by fitting apartments around a stair core, you can increase the size of the units and provide more 3 to 4 unit apartments, which is particularly attractive to a family. And you can also get a lot of like cross ventilation and natural light that you wouldn't normally get on these like really big, massive apartment buildings that we see built here. I just glossed over a lot of like, really important details about why single stair matters. And I would encourage everyone to go check out Zach Bowling's TikToks. He's done a great job at explaining this. And also Alfred True posted a great op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle. And you can learn a lot more there. We're hoping to do more education around this. But the bill at hand, AB 835, would direct the state fire marshal to establish standards that would allow for single stair buildings. And it would ask them to study the issue and then create those standards. And the reason why we're not just going in and editing the building code and instead are asking the fire marshal to do this is we're not fire safety experts. And there are going to need to be a number of mitigating factors in order to allow single stair buildings. For instance, the fire marshal may say it's only safe to have 4 units per floor, or the corridors between apartments need to be rated to withstand fire for 30 minutes. That is up to the fire marshal to really craft, and they are the best, the brain trust really to develop that policy. So we're asking the fire marshal to study it and to develop those policies. And we're excited that we're working on this with LCI down in Los Angeles and East Bay for Everyone. They're really the lead co-sponsors on this. I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
Someone had a question. I think it was Zach had a question, Zach Bowling. Is there any opposition? Is there any main opposition on this? as of now that we know of?
Not yet. We're teeing up conversations with the state fire marshal to get their read on this issue. So far, we haven't registered any opposition, and it seems like the first few committees that this would go through are open to the idea.
Fantastic. Any other questions on AB 309, social housing, or AB 835, vertical access reform? It's the last chance. These are the two we're not coming back to. No, I'm joking. No, if you come up with something, throw it in the Q&A box, and we'll try to come back to it before we end today. All right, not seeing any more on these particular bills. Let's go back to Sosa to talk about SB 684.
There we go. Hit the wrong button. Sorry. SB 684 is authored by Senator Caballero, which we are very excited about, as she is the chair of Senate and Governance and Finance Committee, which is where we anticipate the bill will be referred in addition to Senate Housing. But essentially, this is a reintroduction of AB 3155 for folks that were tracking that bill a couple years ago by Assemblymember Robert Rivas. And this bill is really focused on streamlining and reducing barriers to the development of small lot home ownership projects. California YIMBY is really passionate not only about, the rental side of development and production, protection, preservation, but also on the home ownership end of it, as we recognize that there is a full spectrum of housing needs throughout the state. And we are working with California Community Builders and a coalition of equity and BIPOC organizations on this measure to essentially allow for SB 35 streamlining for home ownership projects, 10 units or less. And we are also looking at the Subdivision Map Act and removing some of the barriers that currently exist to the SMA, modeling this after the ordinance that LA passed many years ago, although we recognize that there have been updates to the ordinance that have made it a little bit more complicated and a little bit more challenging to use. So many of you, if you take a look at the bill, will see that it is spot language. That has a lot to do with the fact that we are still working through and developing the specific policies, both in relation to SB 35 and on the Subdivision Map Act piece of it. But our goal really is to make Subdivision Map Act more useful and more efficient to use. And it was SB 684.
Any additional questions? Any questions on SB 684? Drop them in that Q&A box. We'll be happy to answer them. Give them another couple seconds, see if anyone has any questions on that. All right, we're just cruising right along. I'll take one moment just to remind folks, if Aaron's will drop again, just in case folks that may have joined late and missed it. You can go to our 2023 legislation page on our website to see all the updated information on all our bills. Especially, we try to get those out as quickly as possible as soon as we get new information or as soon as the bills drop. So any updates there, that's a great resource to have to get all that information. Also, as someone mentioned in the chat, I just want to bring that up here. When we talked about calling into to committees, we have a rapid response team. If you're not signed up for it, Aaron will drop that link again. Make sure you sign up for our rapid response team. It's wonderful. It's super fun to see it happening in real time. And it's really impactful for folks right there in the committee to hear from you. And it goes part of that public record of support as well, and really to show up and show out in support of these great bills. So make sure you sign up for our rapid response team. We'd love to have you be part of that wonderful group. All right. Let's go over to Robin to talk about the Alliance.
Thanks, Constantine. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. So we have convened with partners a coalition called the Alliance for Housing and Climate Solutions. This is a group of environmental and housing organizations that are really unified by our goals to end the housing shortage and fight climate change through land use reform. And we believe that these two kind of goals should be tackled together. And so basically, over the last year and a half, we've been needing to really develop consensus around these policies to incentivize building more homes in our existing communities and protecting lands that are necessary for climate resilience. This dovetails pretty nicely with some of California YIMBY's priorities around climate safe housing. As many of you know, probably according to climate scientists, legalizing infill multifamily housing near jobs, school, and transit is one of the most important steps cities can take to address climate change. So we're very excited to be partnering with Assemblymember Ward on a piece of legislation that will look to address these goals. It's going to be pretty complex and going to be a big lift on education. So we are expecting this to be a 2-year bill. So that said, let me dive into what it actually does. So this is built on a policy framework that we are calling Gain, Maintain, Sustain. So the gain zone is where we want to gain homes. Maintain areas of the state of California are where we are going to say, status quo, local control and land use remains. And then the sustain zone will be where we'd like to sustain natural and working lands, again, for that climate resilience. And so the details of the gain zone are that looking at lifting up sustainable communities strategies work. They've identified, majority of the plans identify priority development areas. So we're looking to do a ministerial approval of those areas based on underlined zone capacity. And then additionally, a lot of those plans don't really go far enough, we think, and are not necessarily equitably located throughout all of the regions. So we've also developed a definition to encourage more homes and more density of homes around walkable communities. And these are, areas that are near essential services and amenities like restaurants and bars, coffee shops, supermarkets, grocery stores, hardware stores, parks, pharmacies, and are typically located in higher resource and higher opportunity areas. So then that's the gain zone, comes with ministerial approval and upzoning provisions. Then maintain would be, again, kind of status quo, no real policy proposal in this zone. Sustain zone in this area, like to prioritize protection of natural and working lands, biodiversity. These are lands that are really critical to protect us from wildfires, flooding, farmland, and essential open space to mitigate climate change. Essentially, there would be limitations on intensification of development here. Traditionally in California, we've grown by rezoning ag land or expanding into the wildland urban interface. And there would be robust exceptions to kind of promote sustainable community growth, respect existing, specific plans, vested rights, and the like. It's a bit of the sustain zone is a bit of a Swiss cheese, is the analogy we like to use, where there's limitations on intensification of development with robust exceptions. And I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions in the chat or otherwise.
Remember to throw your questions in the Q&A section. It's a little bit more difficult to see them in the chat. So if you want to make sure that they get answered, please throw them in the Q&A section for us and we can answer them live for you. We have a little time, so we'd love to go ahead and answer your question live, all the way live.
Josh, see your question on bill number. As you may have noticed, Aaron is not ready with that link quite yet. It is coming attraction. We're finalizing language and other details with Assemblymember Ward, and we'll be really excited to share with you all soon.
Any additional questions? On the bill, the Alliance for Housing and Climate Solutions. All right.
Sorry, I'm seeing one from Elizabeth in the chat about plan to make sure South Pasadena and Claremont are not Swiss cheese. I think those areas, we're doing quite a bit of mapping and data analysis to make sure that our criteria are hitting places that we expect. So I think looking at specific communities in that work to really build the base of evidence for, making sure that we're really getting enough new zone capacity will be really key. And so I think looking directly at those communities is going to be a part of it. I'm sorry, I don't have the map or data analysis right in front of me right now to tell you where those are located.
Yeah, and thanks, Robin. And like, just to be clear, we're not like, a big part of this bill is making sure that wealthy neighborhoods are included in these provisions. So if you're talking about like an area that's already urbanized, it's unlikely to be excluded if it meets these various criteria that Robin is talking about. The areas that are likely to be excluded are for, think like, that are undeveloped. And so, I mean, obviously, all the the state and national forests and the federal land is obviously off limits, but also like looking at, okay, like what sort of restrictions are we going to put on like ranch land, ag land, other types of like undeveloped land, so we don't continue sprawling out anywhere. This is going to be, as Robin noted, a lengthy process, and it's unlikely that, like, we don't currently intend to try to move the bill this year in order to actually pass it. The idea is to sort of introduce it, or at least a part of it, and get the conversation going and really work with our partners and frenemies and others to see if we can really drive like broad alignment, because this is going to be a massive, massive bill, just massive. So it's going to bring a lot of support, but also a lot of opposition.
Yeah, I think to Brian's point, this is very much a process. Doesn't mean that we won't have calls to action for you this year. So please do stay tuned. And we're going to continue, with your support, of course, to hopefully build a broader and broader tent to help pass this land use reform. I think I'm seeing a couple other questions in the chat around what kind of density are we talking about here. Right. So I think I can share some things, but the large caveat here is that these are, like policy, like stipulations under consideration. These are not the final, right? Coming attractions, right? With the bill number and language and everything. But, generally we're talking about, 3 stories, expanding lot coverage and minimizing setbacks. These are, townhomes and apartment buildings, could be certainly like missing middle type of buildings, if that helps answer your question. Sorry, I can't be more specific at the moment.
Another question from Carlos Plazola. How does this sustain, if we know yet, how does this sustain some fire hazard areas within existing city boundaries such as Oakland and Berkeley Hills?
Yeah, so let me back up, because I think I did a bad job of explaining the urbanized areas, and Brian did do that, but let me restart that. Sorry, my dog is getting excited. There's another dog visiting.
I mean, it's very excited about this bill. Why not? I can understand it.
Tell them about it, Howie. So basically, cities are not ever going to be in the sustained zone. So, I mean, again, this is like current policy. Things are subject to change, especially as the bill moves through the legislative process. But the idea is that the sustained zone is really unincorporated. One second, sorry.
To finish that thought, it's unincorporated lands, and it's not even like it would be all unincorporated lands. And I just like want to sort of like ask your forgiveness for not being super specific on this matter right now. We're still working with the Senator Ward, because like we have this big proposal that we've been working on with our coalition partners for a while, but He's the assembly member. He and his team also have ideas. And so we're working with him like right now to see like what this looks like. And there could be a difference again between how it's introduced in order to get referred to committees, and then as this bill like takes shape. So like expect to see a lot of changes to this bill.
Yeah. Sorry, I think Brian probably already covered it, but cities are not intended to be sustained zone. These are, our natural and working lands that are intact outside of our existing communities. Our cities and urban areas will be generally divided between like the gain zone and the maintain zone. And, gain zones really, again, defined by those sustainable community strategies, priority development areas that have been identified locally. And then this kind of additional expansion into those higher opportunity, more affluent areas that intersect also with, my mobility criteria. We're talking about walkability. There's also, like proximity to transit, low VMT areas, low vehicle mile traveled areas, right? Basically looking at how do we encourage more development in lower GHG emitting areas to really further some of the climate goals of, as well as housing goals of this bill. Was there other questions in the chat?
I did not see any. All right, I don't see any more in the Q&A. Again, please put your, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A so we can try to answer them live. We have a little bit of time to do that. We carved out time to answer your questions live. So if you can, don't wait. If you have a great question, don't hesitate. Even if you don't have a great question, if you just have a question in general, throw it in the Q&A and we'll make sure we can try to answer that for you. Only bad questions, the one not asked. All right, last call for questions on the Alliance on Housing Climate Solutions bill. All right, thank you, Robin. And don't worry if you missed it. If you're still coming up with your question, throw it in there. We should have a little bit of time at the end to still to cover a few more questions. So we will likely have some of that time at the end to get to those questions we haven't got to. All right, let's go back to Jordan to talk about AB 976 and SB 4.
Thank you. Thank you, Constantine. First, I want to talk about SB 4. I see some chat about it, which is, yes, in God's backyard. And just for context, SB 4 would allow faith institutions such as churches and nonprofit colleges to build affordable housing on their property by right, even if local zoning prevents this housing. We're talking about this bill because although we are not, California YIMBY is not sponsoring this bill, this is definitely a high priority bill for us. Along with already putting a support letter and being listed as support to the committees, we're also joining the coalition cause. We're going to be part of the lobbying group that helps go to Sacramento and making sure this bill passes through the committees. And just to know, we were also at the press conference for SB4 where Brian was able to speak on behalf of California YIMBY. So although we are not sponsoring this bill, we are definitely a high priority, which is why we're also talking about it today. And I'll stop right there and see if anybody would like to add anything or any questions.
I know it's a pretty active chat going, but does anyone have any additional questions on SB 4? All right, let's go on to 976, sir.
Perfect. Yes, so the bit of the success we had with AB AA1 Bloom, which passed in 2020, which increased incentive for homeowners to build more ADUs on their property. We're now coming with AB 976 with similar routine, which will permanently extend the ability of property owners to build affordable rental ADUs by extending the rental unit provisions of AB AA1, which passed in 2020. So in other words, there was an owner occupancy that had a sunset in 2025. Now we're indefinitely going to be removing that sunset and making it easier and encouraging more developers to build more ADUs. California YIMBY is a sole sponsor for this bill, And once again, we're working with the chair of the Assembly Budget, Assembly Ting, based of San Francisco. And I'll stop right there and see if I can answer any questions.
Any questions on AB 976? We do have a question from on SB4 from Adam Bookbinder. Do we expect a large amount of production from SB4? Is it mainly a messaging coalition building bill? Who wants to take that one?
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think actually the Turner Center put out a report a year or two ago when the senator originally ran this bill, SB 899. It actually showed that it would and could potentially provide a lot of additional housing.
Yeah, so again, this is like subsidized housing, so you would still require like public subsidy in order to get it built, and this bill doesn't create new appropriations. But what it does do is it opens up many more sites where you could conceivably get free land, provided the religious institution wanted to work with the nonprofit in order to get the housing built. And so that kind of difference, I forget if someone could find it and drop the link in the chat. I don't recall the number, but Turner did look at that.
And going back to AB 976, Andrew Slocum asked, is it safe to assume the owner occupancy removal would apply to multifamily ADUs as well?
That's actually a really good question.
It would, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's the same code section.
All right. Any other questions on 976 or SB4? All right. Okay, we have a couple, looks like we have some time for some additional questions. Before we jump to additional questions, panelists, anything else you want to add for this bill or any of the other bills? And then we'll just jump, we can dive into some additional questions. And we have time for questions, y'all, so go ahead and add your questions to the chat, to the Q&A box. Zach has actually a question on SB4. Could a city consider a church site could be built in their site inventory in 8 years? In terms of RHNA.
Can you repeat that question? Sorry. Oh, Constantine dropped off.
So I think maybe someone could just add in the Q&A box again. I thought the question was, can you include the church site in the current RHNA cycle?
I don't see why you wouldn't be able to, but this bill would allow housing to be built on those church sites by right ministerially.
Yeah, I mean, I think in order to comply though, right, with like AB 1397, I want to say from 2017, like the site's inventory analysis requirements, like a city couldn't just start saying, oh, like all of our churches are now going to like massively upzone, and that's how we're going to handle like low-income housing. Like there would need to be reason to believe that like a church was interested in doing that.
I see there's a question about SB9 follow-up. So you know, a lot of you may have seen Turner Center released a report on SB9 implementation, and it opened up the discussion of, you know, how could SB9 be better used? It looks like SB9 has had kind of a lackluster start in terms of utilization. There are a number of ways in which cities, in large part in bad faith, have been subverting SB9 by adopting local ordinances that make it practically impossible to do lot splits or develop a duplex. And we've been having conversations with the Pro Tem's office about this. She is very aware of this. We've developed a policy brief discussing how SB9 can be improved based on our conversations with SB9 practitioners and developers. And she has seen that. And she has actually introduced a spot bill, which she has told us she intends to work on some sort of SB9 cleanup this year. I would note, though, that the cleanup is likely to only address the most egregious cases of cities subverting SB9. There's a lot of things that we can do to go back and try to improve SB9 just based off of how it was passed. There are a number of provisions that we had to include in there to get it passed. And it's very unlikely that the Pro Tem will actually address those things. So, any deals that she took or anything that she had to include in the bill in order to get it passed, she likely will not be touching those sorts of policy amendments. So, we're trying to make it as expansive and as powerful as possible. But this is ultimately going to be up to the Pro Tem and what sort of fights she wants to pick.
Yeah.
And
go ahead, Susan.
I was just going to say, I just think it's important to note that while California YIMBY would like to tackle all of the issues that we've seen with SB9, we are obviously going to defer to the Pro Tem on this and work with her. And it may be a more incremental approach, but doesn't mean that we will not continue to work with her and her staff to try to address additional issues. I will say, as Ryan noted, it's a spot bill right now, and it is SB 450. If folks would like to track that's what we'll be using as the vehicle moving forward.
Yeah, and just to clarify, we sent the Pro Tem a very lengthy memo, and thanks to those who helped out and provided examples of various policy issues with SB9, and we proposed recommendations. The tricky thing here, apart from some of the political considerations that Ryan and Susan have mentioned, her lead on this issue has been on maternity leave, and so it's just been like we don't have sort of a strong sense of like what specifically the Pro Tem is interested in addressing. Just directionally, she knows that there have been issues with the bill, and she wants to ensure that it's successful. And like, given that this is like the Pro Tem, the head of the Senate, and this was her bill, if we want to do something to the bill and she doesn't want to, it is not going to happen, right? So like this isn't like something else where we can really try to go hard on it. We're working collaboratively with her office.
I want to add a question from Gloria Bruce from a little earlier in the program. Are there any bills where you anticipate being aligned or in coalition with anti-displacement or tenant protection advocates?
I mean, I would hope they would support all our bills. I think a lot of them are going to support SB4. The YIMBY bill. We have supported many bills in the past to strengthen specifically renter protections. I don't know if there are other bills that are coming from that community that we could come on as supporters of, but we've supported many bills since our founding that have that more narrowly address those issues.
Does anyone want to just quickly talk about if there's any near-term prospects of CEQA reform?
SB 423 is CEQA reform, right? And a bill with the Alliance for Housing and Climate Solutions is also CEQA reform. If you're looking at sort of like more broader, I don't know. it's really, really, really tough to get that done. It's the sort of thing that everyone knows that there's a big problem with CEQA, or maybe not literally everyone, but like all, I don't know, people who weren't paid to think that there was a problem with CEQA, like understand that there's a problem with CEQA. But there are some very, very powerful interest groups that really defend it. So that's a tough one.
I like Elizabeth's comment, SB 423, the big bill. Is there any chatter about the YIMBY ballot initiative, Our Neighbors' Voices, with any of this oh, I just lost that one. All right, well, I just lost that one. Hold on, let me see if I can find that question. Any additional questions, please drop them in the Q&A. We do have some time to answer more questions, so by all means, please ask your questions. Great.
Just like a word about the YIMBY ballot initiative. Thank you, everyone, for restraining your burning desire to dunk on that initiative on Twitter and on social media. We had a very intentional strategy to not publicly discuss that measure, to not talk about it on Twitter. We did not want to drive conflict, drive a story, and help them fundraise. We did not want to increase the saliency of that measure, but we did track it. We tracked all media coverage. We tracked their fundraising. We held, we got like weekly updates about like what was happening last year. But yeah, look, it's back, and so we're doing the same thing again. The tricky thing is, like, does Michael Weinstein decide to steal more money meant for HIV patients and dump it in his for his political causes? That's a real risk. There are certainly other deep-pocketed NIMBYs in the state who could cut very, very, very large checks. So it's a concern, but thus far they haven't gotten very far. I do think the reality of builder's remedy and a stronger housing element process is going to increase the saliency of their initiative, and they may get more traction and more supporters from folks who really don't want to have to rezone.
Here's another question. Actually, one thing I just want to cover too, because I saw some chatter around this. In terms of we're still in the process of evaluating legislation. So there's a lot of bills that we may not be sponsoring, but we are going to definitely be supporting. There's going to be a whole lot of them. But obviously the first priority is working on the bills that we're actually going to be sponsoring and really putting a shoulder behind. And so we're still in that evaluation process, and we will be, more to come on that. But what we'll do is Aaron can drop a link in the chat where we actually, to our abstract that's public, where you can see all the bills that we'll be signing on in support of. So you can go there. It's not much there now, but as the session goes on and we start evaluating bills and signing on in support of them, you can see where we stand on all the housing bills across the spectrum. And Aaron will drop that link in the chat in just a moment for that app. It's a free abstract account. You just go in, you don't have to have an account. You just say skip, make an account and go in there, and you can actually see the list of bills that we support. And you can check back there periodically to see what are those bills that we're supporting.
And I would just underscore that there are close to 100 bills, housing bills, that we're watching this year. And because our ledge team is relatively small, it's going to take a while to develop positions on a number of those bills. So if you go into that report, you see the only bill that we've taken a position on is SB4. We're still working through that list of 90 bills to figure out how we should be prioritizing our positions. It's the bills that we're talking about here tonight are only a small slice of the pie of the bills that are really going to move the needle forward on housing legislation. So over the coming months, you're going to hear about a number of bills that are really maybe increasing housing production or doing moving the needle on other issue areas related to housing. And rest assured, we're tracking those bills. Oftentimes we're engaging behind the scenes on these bills, but we may not be publicly talking about them to our list.
Another question from Brian Trotman. Last time around, we had a bill about collecting data about how well housing legislation was working. Is that coming back?
It's not coming back in our bill package. Fortunately, HCD actually adopted a lot of the things that we were asking them to adopt in their annual progress report. So this annual progress report cycle is going to be the strongest one yet. They've also created a lot of like user-friendly dashboards that allow, frankly, probably mostly YIMBYs to dive into all of the APR data. So hopefully some better data to come this year.
A question from Elizabeth Hansberg. Do we think the tenants' rights folks are going to be wooed over by our neighborhood voices? I think she directed that at you, Brian.
Our neighborhood voices?
I guess that's the group behind the YIMBY ballot initiative.
I don't think so. I mean, like we were, chatting with like Western Center Public Council and all the rest during those discussions last year, because like they recognize that this bill that this like measure would eviscerate housing laws that they care a lot about. So I don't think so. I mean, we were acting aligned there, and I very much wish we could act aligned on more bills going forward.
From Sean McFeely. Speaking of bills passed, should we expect a big campaign to pass SCA 2 when it's on the ballot 2024?
It's so nice to hear from you, Sean. So here's the tricky thing with SCA. So like these are the politics. So SCA 2, for those who don't know, this is the measure. California was one of many co-sponsors, including with a lot of anti-displacement groups, in order to remove Article 34 from the state constitution. Article 34 was put on there by the realtors in 1950. It was an explicitly like anti-communist, racist measure in order to restrict low rent housing in certain neighborhoods. So look, we're very supportive of it. The tricky thing is just initially SCAMF was going to lead the campaign, the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, but they have some other funding measures that they've decided to prioritize, and so like they can't run the campaign now, and so it's just like not clear who was going to be able to run the actual campaign to get that done. We're still sort of working on that, but I do think it was the right decision to pass SCA 2. It was at least like a statement of support from the state legislature. And it's easier to, find someone to run the campaign once there's a real time clock, like, hey, it's on the ballot. The legislature can always pull it back, to be clear. So that is, unfortunately, TBD.
And running those, I'm sure as many of you know, running those ballot initiative campaigns is extremely expensive, in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. You can think something around 10 million just to even get if you have to get signatures. So it's an expensive undertaking.
Yeah, fortunately, we don't need signatures per this one because the legislature put it on the ballot. But look, we've done polling on this, and I'm not going to share. The polling's not great, everyone. And like we think we would lose unless if we had a funded positive media campaign. So that's where we are.
A question around: are there any bills that there might be that we might have a general consensus that we're likely to oppose this year?
None that I've seen so far, but there, like I said, like we engage on a lot of bills behind the scenes. So there's a chance that we may ask for, substantive amendments to make a bill better. But there's nothing that I've seen that really raises red flags.
Although, if you all see really bad bills, definitely let us know and, share it in the various shared Slack channels.
I think too, just as folks know, when we've even talked about this on our sponsored bills, that there are a lot of bills that are spot bills right now. So we may see substantive language come through later that we may need to engage on, but at this point, you know, to Ryan and Brian's point, we may be working sort of informally to try to make bad bills better.
Let's see. All right. Looks like we're coming to the end of the questions. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Don't forget, join our rapid response team. Sign up on our website to see the latest of the bills. If you want to look at, someone was asking about where's a great place to find information, sign up for the homework. We have a lot of articles and research there that comes out almost every couple of weeks, give or take. And it's a really great place to, if you want to get into the details and see the latest stories and information on housing bills. It's a great place to get to pad your information and knowledge around housing. We're going to be asking for your help. We're going to be asking you to call your legislator. We're going to be asking them to send them emails. We're going to be asking you to go into in-office visits, in-district office visits, and also we might even have you come up to Sacramento. Please answer the call. We're going to need your help. As you heard, we'll have a whole lot of wonderful housing legislation. That's going to be some really tough fights coming this year, and we're really going to need your help. If you have any questions, by all means, you can always email us at info@cayimby.org, and we'll try to get to those questions as quickly as we can. And once again, we can't do this without all of you. So we really appreciate all your work and all your efforts in rolling with us over the last several years. We've been able to accomplish some great things together, and the best is still yet to come. So thank you all. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful evening. And we know we can count on you throughout the course of this year to get some of these amazing bills across the finish line. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you. You're the best.